Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video interview, I got to sit down with Raul Junco, who's an engineering manager down in Florida. Now, Raul is an awesome content creator. He focuses a ton on architecture, system design, and all sorts of related things. It was really cool in our conversation to be able to talk through how architecture and similar concepts apply to engineering teams and how you navigate that depending on the life cycle and size of the company that you're working at. He shared his perspectives on startups, freelancing, and different sets of skills that you'll want to consider, and that means that, yes, unfortunately, you'll probably have to come up with estimates at some point in time. If you find this kind of content interesting and you like these types of interviews, let me know by leaving a comment below. Thanks, sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Well, maybe to start off, do you want to give us a little bit of a background for, where and when you started and kind of how you got to where you are and maybe some of the interesting transitions in your career to get to this point?
Right. So I'm software engineering manager. Have almost 20 years of experience working on software, right, creating stuff. Um, I started my career really early. I'm coming from background education, right? So I went to college. Um, I spent my time in university. There's something that we need to talk about it because back in my time, internet almost doesn't exist, right? So that was the way to go to college. Still, I feel it's important to get formal education if you can afford it. Um, but yeah, so I have the opportunity to went to college, right? And most important, I have the opportunity to work on real projects while we're there.
Mm.
So the university itself have a program where, like, if you're willing, right, you can spend more time and use the resources of the university to create software for partnerships, right? So the university bring partnerships, we create software for them. That changed the way I build software forever, right? Because early in my career, I learned those lessons about listening, asking questions, right? When I hit the market, right, I have all those skills already built up. Um, that was incredible. And to be honest, uh, my first position was actually coming from that, right? So one
Mm.
project, through one project, I meet a contractor right there, and I got a recommendation for that position. So when I finish, I already have a job ready. And that's incredible. Uh, People doesn't or does pay attention to those uh, steps that you can go ahead in your career, and
Mhm.
maybe you can find a non-profit organization, right? You can help, and that's gonna give you some skills. So don't think about you are just giving, you are receiving. Also, you are training as part of you. So back in that, I just started working in enterprise, mostly all the time right there. Then I have the opportunity to travel to Mexico. I lived in Mexico for a year, uh, learn about the culture, about the company right there, enjoy my time right there big time. Then I moved to United States, and I started working on startups, right? And that is the second step, right? That changed again the way I build software, right? Because I was building software for enterprise. Now I'm building for a startup, and that changed again, right? Different flow, different way to build things, different trade-off, right?
Mhm.
And different skills too, right? Sorry, because when you build software for enterprise, you are equipped with different skills. But where you are building software for startups, you have to wear different hats. You have to learn infrastructure.
Right.
You have to call to clients. You have to jump into calls, right, with stakeholders. Um, and it's a different way to see the process, right? There's no more clear requirements coming, right? And it's more like you have to build your requirements you have to build your infrastructure, you have to put all together and make a solution for a client. So I've been in that mode for a long time, and to be honest, I love it. Uh, sorry, I don't know if um, I will try enterprise again. Willing to do it. It's
Mhm.
just like I'm enjoying the life of working for a small company, creating a product. That's incredible, and I love it. So it's just a little bit about me.
Awesome. No, it's really cool. You mentioned like during school and stuff having this opportunity to kind of work on things with like the university would bring in partners and you can contribute to projects and stuff for them. That's a similar experience that I had. And one of the reasons, like I guess my bias for university and college is like if you have like I had in like an internship program, and for me that changed everything about my perspective about school because I remember starting off university and being like, I just don't like this. I don't like the classes I have, don't feel like they're useful. Everything was, I went from being like a very great student in high school to feeling like I don't know anything in university, but it also didn't feel relevant. But then I would go on an internship and I had 6 internships. So it was like 2 full years of work by the time I graduated. And every internship, I was like, this is exactly what I want to be doing. This is exactly why I need to stick to this. And you mentioned as well that when you were wrapping up, you sort of had this opportunity to continue working. And for me, it was a similar thing where, you're wrapping up your internships and it's like you potentially have these offers for some of the last places you were working. So again, a very nice stepping stone to go from education to the workplace, which I don't know, like I might not have appreciated it as much at the time. Like it was kind of like this is just what happens. But looking at things right now, I'm like, oh man, I feel like that is such a advantage, right? With respect to being in like startup mode, and you kind of mentioned enterprise as well. I think from your perspective at this point, you mentioned being in startups, so like that kind of work environment is something that you can appreciate a little bit more now, a little bit more interesting. What what were some of the big sort of differences that you notice, right? You kind of called out having to make some things on your own, let's say in startups versus at bigger companies, you kind of have some of that. But in terms of like your interests, let's say, like why is it that the startup kind of landscape is really a little bit more appealing for you?
Right. So I think I think we have two main components, right? First component is ownership. So um, I feel like when you are working on a startup, right, the feeling of ownership is different. It's bigger. You have more responsibility, and that's come with the second part, which is the ability for you to contribute, right, to change the path, to propose something that really impact the product that you are building, right? Um, and again, it's not that you cannot do it on enterprise. It's just that you have to be in the different level to be able to do it, right? So you have to be in a management position, or you have to be in an architectural positions to being able to
Hmm.
impact a decision into software. When you are in a startup, maybe you don't need to be on that kind of level. You can change the path in more impactful way wouldn't necessarily have a, a, a specific position, right? So um, that's one of the things. The other thing is the freedom, right? Um,
Yep.
Mostly on enterprise, right? You have to follow standard protocols, right? This is the tools that we use. This is how we do these things, and this is how we deploy, or this is how we interact with the customer. This is the process we created. It's not necessarily bad thing. It's the process. As soon as you grow, you have to change the way you work together, right? In startups, that thing is a little bit more chaotic, but at the same time, you
Hmm.
have more freedom, right? You have more freedom to make more decisions about tools, about how they want to deploy, right? And try and error, right? So you can try and error more you learn more in that process. I think those are the two main uh, components that I love for being startup, right? The other thing is the challenge, right? The challenge every day. That's something that you have to be aware. If you are not ready to be challenged every day, don't go to startup, because that's how it is.
That's a no, it's a really good set of points there. Before we move on, this is just a reminder that I do have courses available on Dome Train if you want to level up in your C# programming. If you head over to Dome Train, you can see that I have a course bundle that has my getting started and deep dive courses on C#. Between the two of these, that's 11 hours of programming in the C# language, taking you from absolutely no programming experience to being able to build basic applications. You'll learn everything about variables, loops, a bit of async programming, and object-oriented programming as well. Make sure to check it out. I think there's been a handful of times where, especially for more junior folks, and they're looking for advice on, I want to get into big tech, or like I want to start working, like where should I be applying to? Like currently working at Microsoft, it feels almost kind of awkward for me to say, like, I actually don't think Microsoft is like the best place for you to start out. And it's not because I think Microsoft has a problem with, junior engineers. It's that my experience was that I worked at small companies before Microsoft, and I feel that uh, exactly as you said, this opportunity where like you can be wearing many hats, there's all these things that, like, these, whether there's systems or processes, like they're not in place yet. You get to be part of helping shape that. Like there's this discovery about these things, this the trial and error, and again, you get to be part of it. So I think you said it really well. Like if you're not ready for that kind of stuff, like then yeah, maybe it's not a good fit for you, because I think maybe some people that have experienced both, you might be like, hey, I don't want to have to think about the build system. I don't want to have to think about deployments, because I just want to be able to put my head down and work on my stuff. In which case, yeah, like, I don't know, at a startup, you probably have to be paying attention to that kind of thing, because it's probably broken half the time or needs to be built. Like just a different set
Yeah.
of constraints that you have to go navigate day to day.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing. Um, those skills, right? It's not gonna help just it's not gonna help you just to get a job or another job, right? Or a better position or growing in your path. It's also gonna help you to create something, right? If you want to do a side project, if you want to create your company, you want to work as freelancer, right? You have to have
Mhm.
those skills. You have to have a negotiation. You have to learn how to
Mhm.
uh, create a contract. You have to do estimates, right? Because most
Yep.
of the time, this is the most common questions, right, on the startups is how long is going to take this, or how much is
Mhm.
going to cost this. You are pretty close to the budget, right? So you can understand and make triage of, okay, so as I spend this big instance of the APIN, that's going to cost us this monthly. Is that something we can afford?
Right.
Maybe that's not the way. Maybe the way is, okay, I can deploy a most um, like a small instance right here, and I can do an open source, and I can, instead of using or pay for the service that's gonna cost us 3,000 a month, I can put together a Linux server, right, and deploy this open source right here. It's gonna take you more configuration, it's gonna take you more time, but it's gonna be long term. It's gonna be less expensive in infrastructure. You're gonna have uh, uh, more, more, more. How can I say this? You're gonna have more ability in changing that or scaling
Mhm.
that in different way, right? So those kind of tutorials, so those are the things that you learn right there, right? Um, I even I worked for a few years in also to kind of a startup service company, right? So I have the
Okay.
opportunity to work with different clients, right? So every 2 or 3 months, it's a new project, it's a new client. Um, Most of the time, to be honest, we're big clients, right? We work with big clients like corporate clients, like enterprise client. They need a small project together, or they need like a POC putting together, or they want this idea, they want the budget, and they need a team to help them to put it together, right? Most of the time, we just jump in, um, um, we put, we set up things, we create infrastructure, we create like the MVP, right? And
Mhm.
transfer everything over their team. That's what happened. But that's helped me to understand, for example, the estimation process, right? So one
Mhm.
of the exercise that we do every single project was budget, time, allocation of resources, right? For every single project, right? And it's an exercise, and I understand, people, hey, estimates and everything, and all the estimates are run, and yes, right. But an estimate can give you a plan, right? um, a plan is important for a project, right? Um,
Right.
so I created those every single like 2 or 3 months. So I create my spreadsheet where I can put numbers right here. I can estimate features. I jump into the calls with the clients, right? I determine what's the relevant of this feature versus this feature right here. So I let me put the priority. Let me play a little bit with the priority. So if the time is not is a constraint, right? Maybe this feature right here we can deprioritize and put it at the very end. This is gonna be a nice to have versus a must, right? So all those
Yeah.
concepts, right, help you to build a product mind, right? So you are very close to the client. You are very close to the product. You are very close to the budget, right? And those skills is gonna help you. If you want to create your own company, you need those skills. If you want to do freelance, you need those skills, right? So it's not just it's gonna help you to go to the next level, but also it's gonna help you to explore another path, right? Another ways to build software and solve solutions for clients. So that's another benefit. There's like hidden benefits right there, because most of the time you learn all those skills struggling, right? Nobody in startup is gonna create an onboarding process for you to learn those skills. That doesn't exist,
Right.
you jump one day in a project and someone asks you, hey, can you help me to do this? And you learn. You fail sometimes. You solve the problem biggest way, like sometimes, and that's how you
Mhm.
learn the process. But it's interesting. I enjoy a lot. I'm good to enjoy it still, to be honest. It's something that I feel like people need to try. People need to try at least one
Yeah.
time, so you get a flavor for that.
Yeah. That's it's funny the estimation part, right? I know, like as you said, like people don't like estimates. They're always wrong. But the even so, I think the part for at least for me, we're talking through estimates. It's like sure they might always be wrong, but like I think it's about trying to find ways to get value out of that process. So if the way that I look at it is like if you don't talk about estimating things at all, you're missing out on these conversations where people are trying to say like I think it takes longer because of XYZ, like, and then you might go, oh, I never even thought about you know Y in your list, or I only thought about X and Z, and you miss those opportunities. So for me, that's the biggest takeaway. It's like if we were saying it's going to take 4 weeks and it ends up being 5 or 6 weeks, I'm like, sure, it sucks that it's not perfectly accurate, but the other thing too is like as you're going through, and this is obviously going to depend on where you're working, but if you have a feedback loop and you said we think it's going to take 4 weeks, if you're 2 weeks in and you're like we're not halfway done, like you should be having conversations about that. So I always like to think, or at least explain to my teams, even at Microsoft, which is it's big tech. It's not startup mode with there's a lot of these processes that are in place. I just like reminding people, like, look, if we said it's going to take this long and we're not on track for that, I'm not chasing after you to say, like, shame on you, you did bad. I'm like, I've been writing software for a long time, and I know we're never going to be accurate when we estimate. But if this is what we were predicting, like, let's try to make sure that if we feel off track, we're talking about it. Even if you're going faster, like, you might say, hey, it's done in a week and we thought it was going to take 4. Great. But we should still have a conversation and say, cool, now that that's wrapping up, like, what's the next thing that we should be looking at? So it's not about, I think over time, the more accurate you can get, that's great. But it's really just about, for me at least, this deeper dive into what we think is involved. And then number 2 is, like, if we're veering off course from it, let's just have conversation so we can understand why. It's not a shame on any one kind of thing. It's just a learning opportunity and course correction.
That's exactly what I thought. And so here's the thing: the exercising, right? So you put a software engineer in a room. You ask for a task and you ask for an estimate, right? Just give them 5 minutes to get that estimate ready. Do the same exercise 1 week later, but give them 30 minutes and ask them to write down the task, right? Like, okay, let's digest this, right? So to get this form, we need this service and we need this field. We need to consume this information. We need to bring that information from here. We need to create this schema in database. The estimate is going to be totally different, right? Because exactly what you mean. The process, the value you get from that is going to help you to plan in the future. But also, it's going to give you the steps that you have to complete to get that thing done. So, through the estimate process, you are also understanding, you are making questions, because once you hit that, okay, where should I get these values, right? This is going to be the fixed drop down that you can select for, or do we need to consume a service that give us those values? Who is the team that own that service? How is that an API, or what is that, right? Is that a REST API? What is this, right? So all that thing is when the real value come in, right? And on top of that, right, you get a sense of how long it's going to take this, or how much resources we need to use, right, to complete the task. Uh, but again, process 100%. I say that's the value right there. When you digest all the things, when you can think about simple tasks, right, that solve the big problem. Uh, so yeah, still super valuable, right?
Yep.
I you know I'm still vouching for that every single day.
No, that's cool. I think, yeah, estimates, as much as I don't like them, and probably as much as other people don't, it's about looking for the value. And I think if you're following a very strict process and no one is finding value in the estimates, like, that's an opportunity to say, like, what should we be doing differently about this to try and get value out? This is probably what I would say about any process. And I don't want to necessarily go down the agile rabbit hole, but a lot of people saying, like, hey, it doesn't work because we follow this agile process very strictly and it just doesn't work for our team. And then I go, well, maybe you shouldn't be following it as strictly because it's not very agile to do that. But anyway, that aside, I wanted to ask you a little bit about on some of the technical front. I know we were chatting a little bit before. System design for you is a very big thing, and I had a curious question, specifically, like, when it comes to this difference between, say, like, enterprise world and startups. At least from my perspective, and you were kind of touching on this a little bit earlier, in startups, it's a little bit more scrappy. There's a little bit less figured out, kind of trying to figure things out as we go. When you have all of this knowledge about system design, some of it can feel very theoretical, right? Like, this is the pattern, this is the design, and this is how it would look if we had unlimited resources and no constraints or something. But when you start to get into a startup, how does your mindset shift around, or how do you educate people around these system design concepts, and here's how we might have to veer off course or something because we are a startup? Like, can you maybe walk through some of that for us?
Right, right. This is a super interesting conversation, and the the topic, like one of the classic topics on this conversation, is microservices versus monoliths, right?
Sure.
Every single time, right? So I understand, I there are so much microservices, right? The value right there is incredible, but it's just for a specific um, solutions, right? Um, and there is misconception, right? Because microservices is pretty cool. Let's be honest. We like it. It's modular. It's independent. It's scalable, right? It's really cool. It's one of the architectures that I love, to be honest. Um, Despite the the last years, people like go to monolithics or whatever. I'm still seeing a lot of value right there if you use correctly, right? Um,
Mm.
and that's why you should be start small, right? If you are a startup, please don't go and try to anticipate all the load that you're gonna have, right? And try to create 20,000 microservices, because here's the thing, they require work, they require writing. Things broke in the past, and if you have a small team, you are not going to be up you're not going to be able to afford that kind of infrastructure and deployment and all the effort that you need to get that thing done correctly, right? You can do, you can do and deploy 20 microservices. I can do it right now in the morning, right? um are those going to be working well, right? Do I have the real monitoring, right, on the things that is happening? Can I automate that process? Can I really test that kind of that the infrastructure is working together, all the services are communicating the way it should be? Uh, that doesn't. That's not the reality, right? So, but here's the caveat, right? If you can start small, to be honest, you should be starting small. You should be starting with the monolith application, but try to be or create that monolith application as modular as possible, right? Because that will give you the advantage, right? If you create your monolith application in a modular way, then you are gonna be in the path. It's gonna be easy for you to separate those modules and put them in different services, right? So as soon as you identify a specific module have a different characteristics, right? Like different load, for example, right? So you have a registration service that has a really strong load and needs to have a really um, availability, like real availability, because you want people registered to your system. That's a priority for you. Then you can extract that, put it on the microservices, right? Giving them the resources that they need and the attention that they need, and keep the recommendation engines, for example, in a different place with different capabilities. This is not important. This is not as important as possible as registration for your system. So it has different characteristics. So you can isolate that. That's the way I like to think about it. Some people, in some point, people starting associating monolith application with legacy code. I don't think that's a real. I don't think that's a real deal. You can have monolith application, legacy monolith application, and microservices, like legacy microservices that nobody will maintain because the thing is super small, right? And now you have 20 microservices. How you're going to be maintaining those microservices, right? So they get right there in the corner. They get a lot of dust, and at some point they broken, right? Or the framework was, or the framework went, like out of life, and it's like, oh my god. So legacy is a different animal. It has nothing to be with architecture, right? It has to be with technical depth and maintenance.
That's
That's
no,
another.
that's a, I think it's a good example
Yeah,
to
go ahead,
talk
go ahead.
about the like the monolith and microservice kind of debate, right? Because like I think a lot of us see that coming up. I think you really hit on a good point where, and I don't have like statistics on this, but I feel like you said it, what I observe a lot, which is that people hear monolith and they immediately go, this is legacy, right? Like this is the old way to do it, this is the bad way to do it, it must be legacy. But especially over the last few years, I've seen the shift the other way, where people are going, look, like, yeah, microservices have a lot of like promise on paper, but there's all this complexity that you might not realize until you start creating all these microservices. I love your example of just being like, sure, you can do it, but are you doing it right? Are you going to maintain it properly? Because that's where you're about to land a bunch of code that's going to be legacy real fast.
Yeah, real problem. I mean, so here's the thing. The reality is, if you have a small team, it's gonna be easy for you to keep the technical debt low if you are in monolithic,
Mm.
because that's the source code you're working every single day, right? If you do
Yeah.
microservices, right, those are isolated. You have intentionally to, okay, let me go to this corner right here and maintain this thing. Let me go to this other side and maintain this. And in some point, if one service is stable enough and doesn't have new requirements or new things every single day, guess what? That thing's gonna go next. That thing's gonna keep it behind the rest of the services when you are working actively, because it's the
Mm-hmm.
reality, time constraint, right? So you have to prioritize, and you will prioritize what is needed right now. So again, it's just a trade-off, right? um, and it's totally fine if you have a combination. You can have a big monolithic consuming some microservices, because
Sure.
it's totally fine. You say, okay, for this specifically domain right here, I need this kind of availability, right? Or I need this kind of redundancy. So I like to isolate that and then consuming for the big monolithic application. That's totally fine. This microservice right here, this specific domain, it's going to have a dedicated team, right? It's going to have a different cadence, right, of maintenance from the main monolithics, right? So sometimes, if you are, especially if you are exploring or spinning a new domain, that domain is going to change a lot, right? That software is going to change a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And if you tie that to within the monolithic, now you have to deploy the monolithic every single time you have to change something, right? So you can isolate that. You can put a package emitter, facade emitter, try to consume those services, keeping the deployment and the release cycle different from the monolithics to the
Mm-hmm.
microservice itself, right? So it's something that you can explore. It doesn't have to be black or white. You can mix it up, right? And use the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think one thing you were kind of touching on there is like how things can change and evolve, and I wanted to dig into this a little bit more from your perspective, where I feel like a lot of people perceive building systems, software architecture as a static thing, right? We pick the architecture, we build it. Once we're done building the thing, like, don't touch it again because we have to go move on to the next thing. This is our architecture. This is how it looks. But even in your example, it's like, you could be building out a monolith. You focus on things like modularity, sort of like these, we call them like best practices, right? Like, we know that if we can build systems that are modular, we get these benefits. I guess my question that I want to start to ask you about here is, in some as someone in a position that has influence over teams, right? You can influence the technology direction, the architecture. Um, how do you kind of get people to have awareness of this, especially like in like a startup kind of landscape where it's like, look, like we got to do something that works now, and we know that we want things to keep moving forward into the future. Like, what are how do you have conversations with people to get them to see that just because we do it one way now doesn't mean we've carved it in stone and like we've kind of sealed our fate? I don't know if that question makes sense though.
Right? No, no, that's an interesting thing because so I feel the first step for that is so here's the thing. I think architecture, software architecture, is so important that shouldn't be a decision of an individual, right? Should be a team decision. I understand that an individual having a specific role, right? If you are an architect, right? Of course you are better at that, right? You have been practicing that. Um, so I trust that you can deliver something that the
Mhm.
team can use correctly, right? It's gonna guide us into the process to build the software better, right? But here's the thing: I like to think that those decisions, I I like to think the architecture is the proposal for those decisions, right? But those decisions has to make within the team, and people I love peer reviews, right? Peer programming and all the stuff because of the connections and then better decision and the better output you get for that. But also, I like to apply the same thing to system design. So, how about we design the system together? How about you put the team together, right? Senior people, junior people. This is going to be beneficial for everybody. But most important of that is going to give us the ownership over that architecture, right? So once you involve the team on making those decisions, you come with the proposal as an architect. So here's the proposal. This is what I think we should be using this kind of component, this load balancer right here. Why this part of the system need to be serverless, right? You come with this thing. You go to the team and say, hey, this is the proposal. Let's work together on get this thing better, right? Just the same time that just the same importance that you, or the same time that you dedicate to, for example, a refinement session, right? When you talk about the features of the system, when you're planning the system, you should be doing the same with architecture, right? That gives you ownership for the team, and most important thing, the team understand the trade-off, right? Uh, Sometimes architecture is just I used to think about system design as a messy trade-off, right? A collection of messy trade-off. You have to make trade-off. It's maintainability versus complexity, is simplicity, versus time to build. You have to make those. And if you involve the team on the architectural decision, ownership is going to be everybody on this, right? We make decision together. So when we change it, we're going to be changing together, and we want to be understand why we need to change it, right? Which is more important. It's just so for me, ivory tower architects, X and anti patterns. To be honest, architects should be architecture should be responsibility of the entire team. The entire team should have the ability to contribute to architecture. Even if you have a dedicated person, a dedicated group of person, right? A group of people making the guidance, right? The architecture itself should be self-explanatory for the team, and the team should be able to
Mhm.
make decisions or changing or make recommendations, right? Or at least being part of the discussion of that architecture. That's what I think I personally try to use in my teams. Um,
Mhm.
to be honest, I like the way that thing. I understand some people doesn't like it, right? If you have a developer that doesn't want to be on those conversations, that's fine. You know, people have different skills, and
Sure.
you should be able to recognize that. Uh, so it's totally fine, but should be open. Architecture should be open.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That philosophy of like, yeah, the ivory tower situation. Like I've seen that firsthand not work very well. But I think it's an underappreciated kind of thought there, where you can have someone who has a particular skill set, particular set of experiences, and yeah, they might be like sort of call it like the expert or the authority in that space, but this idea where you bring people together and have them contribute, they have this calling it like a sense of ownership, right? This pattern, even outside of architecture, you take it to any concept on a software development team, and I think that you ultimately get way more engagement, enthusiasm. I'll give you a completely different example outside of architecture. Let's talk about the development life cycle, right? Like if you're using Kanban or Scrum or some hybrid, whatever your iterations look like, if you just like as an engineering manager, if I was brought onto a team and the very first thing I did was I said, "Hey team, here's how we're doing stuff going forward," it might be on paper a way better process than anything they're doing on paper. But in practice, you're going to have people that are probably like, I don't want to do that because I wasn't part of coming up with that. And if you can get people to be engaged in that process, putting their thoughts forward, they start to feel that they have ownership. So not only do you get people that are more engaged because they were part of that process, but the other thing too, and going back to architecture, is like there's going to be blind spots. You might be the expert, you might have the experience, but you put things down on paper and say, here's the proposal. Hopefully, hopefully you have people on the team that go, well, what about this? Right. And then you come up with this better plan that is the combination of different thoughts that the team has. So I really like that approach.
And some this is important because here's the thing. Um, Even the architecture or the architect has the general right view of often, right? Have the general view of the product you're building or your company or how the things work together. Real people that use those services every single day can have a different opinion. They know, for example, the latency of that service.
Mhm.
And that's important because that can help you to make a better decision in terms of architecture, right? So if you're going to be depending on a specific service and someone knows that the latency of that service is not good, right? And you can change it because sometimes you can't change it, right? Maybe it's a legacy service right here. Maybe it's a third party service. You can do anything around that, right? So you have to live with that. That person that have that knowledge can contribute and can change the way you design the architecture itself, right? So maybe it's not going to be a synchronous process right now. It's better to be an
Sure.
asynchronous one because the latency right there is going to kill the feature, right? So those on-field knowledge, that's just coming from people that use the system and develop the system every single night. And when you are in the architecture, sometimes you don't have the luxury, right, to go down all the way and knows those
Mhm.
details. So that's a contribution, right? That's important. That's a missing detail that you need.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe as a kind of a final thought on that, the if we flip the script around a little bit, for people that are watching, if you are more junior and you're like, well, how can I be beneficial in different ways as someone that's more junior? I want to be exposed to more architecture type things. Like as you were just saying, that's a great example to say, I have knowledge about this domain. It might be limited knowledge, but if you have some knowledge, you can kind of chime into those conversations and even just be asking questions, right? Like, hey, did we consider the latency of this? Did we consider that this service takes some time to spin up, or that, whatever these things might be that you can just start kind of sharing that information and bringing awareness to it. So I I just wanted to kind of reiterate that that collaborative experience can go really far, and it doesn't matter if you are more junior. There's opportunities for you to be able to kind of chime in on that kind of stuff, provided that your team is organized in a way that facilitates that. So, I thought that was a really cool example to walk through. So I wanted to say thanks for sharing that. Maybe as a because I haven't asked you ahead of time, but for folks that want to learn more about the stuff that you're putting out there, a lot more system design kind of concepts and things like that, I'll ask for specific links and stuff for you after, but can you share with folks where they can get in contact with you or find more of your content?
Right. So I write every single day now, but every single week, right? I try to, especially on weekdays. I I write my experience. You can find me on Twitter. Uh, it's Raul Junco on Twitter. On LinkedIn too. I write a lot on LinkedIn. Um, and recently I started my newsletter, um, where I can expand a little bit more, right? Because um, I feel like a link in Twitter is pretty cool for connections, pretty cool for interaction. But if you want to go deep into system design, you need a little bit more text, right? You need more real estate and you need more time. So I started a
Right.
newsletter. It's really young newsletter, but it's a system design classroom on Substack. So I'm right here all the week. You can reach me. You can send me a message. You can put a comment. I will. I try to respond to every single comment. That's important, especially the questions one, because I feel that's the way we should be learning, making questions and um, looking for answers. And I learn a lot on that process, to be honest. Some questions, right? I have been learning for questions, incredible questions like, oh, why should be doing this in this way, right? That one would be that what should be doing every single day, asking questions.
Yep.
That's
No, and I love that. We were chatting about that a little bit before recording, though, right? But some of the best value, like as people consuming content, is to be asking questions, but also as content creators, when people are asking questions, it's a great opportunity to kind of get your own thinking cap on, because you might be able to say, yeah, like actually, no, like this does make sense. Here's why, and you can explain it further. That's great. Or sometimes you get these questions where it's not people being rude or mean, but they're kind of they kind of challenge the way you think a little bit, and you go, oh, like that's a great point. Like I wonder how we go explore this. So it's beneficial for everyone, which is really cool.
it is. It is. Yeah, I love it. That's what I write every single day. That's it.
Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to say thanks again for the time to have this conversation. I'm sure that folks that were watching or listening are going to get a ton of value out of it, especially like just having these different perspectives on, especially around architecture and system design concepts where these types of things aren't carved in stone. There are different ways that you can go approach this stuff, and I think that the more open we can be to that and having like productive conversations together, the better outcomes you can get. So just wanted to say thanks again for sharing those
I
insights.
want to say thank you for the opportunity, man. It's just I've been waiting a lot for this conversation. Sorry about the schedule and everything, but yeah, we have to do it again. That's it. That's the only thing that I have to say.
Awesome.
Have to do it again.
I would
Let's
love to do it again.
say okay. For beans.
Awesome stuff. Okay, well, thanks folks for watching. Do the thing where you like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, all the fun stuff, and we'll see you next time. Take care.